The school hallway was buzzing with the usual morning energy. Lockers clanged, students laughed and shouted across the corridors, and the smell of fresh paint mixed with the faint scent of pencils and paper. It was just another day at the school, but for one boy, this day felt heavier than most. He walked slowly, his backpack hanging low, his hands slightly trembling as he held onto the straps. He wasn't like the other kids who moved confidently through the hallways, joking with friends or boasting about their weekend achievements. He kept his head low and his pace steady, trying not to draw attention. In the classroom, the teacher's voice rang out, sharp and commanding. She was known for her strict rules and high expectations. Students respected her, but they also feared her a little. Today, she was giving a lesson on something complex, something that required confidence and presentation. As she spoke, her eyes scanned the room, settling briefly on the boy who seemed smaller than the rest, almost invisible unless one looked carefully. A faint frown crossed her face as she muttered under her breath, "He'll humiliate himself." The boy didn't hear the words, but he could feel the weight of doubt in the room. He knew people expected him to fail. It wasn't the first time. In fact, it happened so often that he had almost begun to accept it as normal. Others whispered behind his back, laughed at small mistakes, and teachers sometimes made assumptions about what he could or could not do. But deep down, he carried a quiet belief that there was something more to him than anyone realized. There was a skill, a talent, hidden behind his shy smile and nervous gestures, something that he had nurtured quietly for years in the solitude of his own room. As the lesson went on, the teacher explained the task for the day. It was a challenge, a presentation that would test the students' understanding and ability to communicate clearly in front of the class. The boy felt a wave of anxiety wash over him. His heart thumped in his chest, and his palms became slightly sweaty. He knew the whispers would start, the snickers that came with expectation of failure. His mind raced with doubts, but he reminded himself of the countless hours he had spent preparing, practicing in secret, perfecting a skill that few knew he had. It was time, he thought, to show a glimpse of what he could really do. The classroom was divided in its attention. Some students were eager, ready to show off what they had learned. Others were indifferent, half listening, half checking their phones. And then there were those who were quietly curious about the boy. They had watched him stumble in the past, seen him fail in small ways, but something about him was intriguing. There was a stillness about him, a calm that didn't match his nervous appearance. It was almost as if he carried a secret strength, one that hadn't yet been revealed. The teacher called out names one by one, assigning tasks to each student. When she reached the boy, she paused. Her eyes narrowed slightly, almost challenging him. "You," she said, her tone sharp, "you will start today." The room shifted uncomfortably, the whispers growing louder. Some students exchanged skeptical glances, while others leaned forward with curiosity. The boy felt a knot in his stomach, but he straightened his back and took a deep breath. He nodded, his voice barely above a whisper, but firm enough to acknowledge the teacher's words. Walking to the front of the room felt like crossing a battlefield. Every step seemed heavier than the last. He could hear the silent judgment in the classroom, the expectation that he would fail spectacularly. His mind raced with possible mistakes, with ways he might embarrass himself. But alongside the fear, there was a quiet determination, a small voice telling him that this was his moment. He had prepared, he had practiced, and now he had the chance to prove that the words of doubt were wrong. The boy set his materials on the desk in front of the class, his hands steadying as he organized everything. He glanced around the room, noticing the subtle smirks, the raised eyebrows, and the doubtful expressions. For a moment, he felt the weight of the world pressing down on him. But then he remembered why he had come to school, why he had spent so many lonely hours practicing, and why he had refused to give up despite the doubt surrounding him. This wasn't just about the teacher or the classmates. It was about proving to himself that he was capable of more than anyone thought. The teacher gave him a final nod, a silent signal that it was time to begin. He opened his notebook, took a steadying breath, and started. The first few words were shaky, a little uneven, but he pushed through, focusing on the task at hand. With each sentence, he found his rhythm, his confidence growing quietly but steadily. The classroom, which had been filled with whispers and doubt, began to quiet down. Some students leaned forward, their curiosity piqued. Others stopped their side conversations, sensing that something unexpected was unfolding. As he continued, his nerves began to transform into a quiet energy. Every word, every movement showed the skill and effort he had invested in this moment. The boy wasn't just completing a task. He was expressing a part of himself that had long been hidden. The talent that no one had expected to see was beginning to emerge, subtle at first, but impossible to ignore. The expressions around the room started to change. Doubt was giving way to surprise, skepticism to admiration. The teacher, who had initially expected a failure, felt her own surprise growing. The boy was not stumbling, not failing. He was delivering the task with a quiet confidence and an unexpected depth. Her frown softened, replaced by an expression of intrigue. The whispers that had started with doubt now shifted into quiet murmurs of amazement. The boy, unaware of the change in the room, focused on what he knew he could do, each movement and word reflecting the countless hours of practice and perseverance. By the end of the first part of his presentation, the atmosphere in the classroom had transformed. The boy, who had entered the room with fear and doubt pressing on his shoulders, now stood with a subtle but unmistakable presence. The room was no longer filled with expectation of failure, but with attention and quiet admiration. He had begun to change the narrative, not with loud declarations or dramatic gestures, but through the simple, authentic expression of his talent and dedication. The bell rang, signaling the end of the period, but the boy's impact lingered. Classmates exchanged glances, some nodding in silent respect, others still processing what they had just witnessed. The teacher, momentarily speechless, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that her initial judgment had been wrong. The boy gathered his things, his heart still racing, but now with a different kind of excitement. The thrill of having taken the first step, of having begun to reveal a side of himself that no one had expected. As he walked back to his seat, he felt a mix of relief and anticipation. This was just the beginning. He had faced the initial fear, the doubt, the skepticism, and had survived. More importantly, he had taken the first step toward showing the world, and perhaps even himself, what he was truly capable of. The boy sat down, his hands still trembling slightly, but now with a sense of quiet pride. He knew the journey ahead would have more challenges, more doubt to overcome, but for the first time, he felt ready to face them, confident that the unexpected could become real, and that the story of his true potential was just beginning. The boy's heart was still beating fast as the bell rang, signaling the end of the first period. He took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but he knew the challenge was only just beginning. The teacher had assigned a bigger task for the class, something that required not just knowledge but courage and confidence. Today, each student was to perform or present something in front of everyone, and the boy could feel all eyes subtly turning toward him. The whispers started again, soft at first, like shadows in the room, but growing louder with each passing second. Some students exchanged knowing looks, certain he would fail, certain they would witness his humiliation. He tightened his grip on his notebook, the edges of the pages worn from late-night practice sessions. For years, he had spent time alone, refining a skill he loved. It wasn't something everyone understood, and certainly not something he had ever shown in public. That had always been the point. He liked the quiet, the privacy, and the freedom to make mistakes without judgment. But now, in front of the whole class, the walls of that privacy felt far away, replaced by the harsh glare of expectation. As the teacher went through the instructions, the boy listened carefully. Every word was a reminder of what was expected, and every glance from his classmates was a reminder of what they assumed would happen. He felt the familiar weight of doubt pressing on him, a heavy coat that he had worn many times before. But this time something felt different. There was a spark inside, a quiet determination that whispered, "This is your moment. You can do this." He closed his eyes for a brief second, recalling all the hours he had spent practicing, all the times he had perfected small details no one else noticed. That memory brought a small, steadying calm. When the teacher began calling students to perform, the boy watched carefully. Each presentation unfolded, some flawless, some shaky. He noticed the reactions of his peers. Laughter at mistakes, polite applause for good work, and subtle smiles of surprise when someone exceeded expectations. Watching them, he felt a mixture of fear and hope. Fear that he would fail, but hope that maybe, just maybe, he could surprise everyone the way he had always imagined. Finally, the teacher called his name. The room seemed to pause, a silence falling that made the air feel heavier. The boy took a slow, steadying breath and stepped forward. Every eye in the room followed him. He could hear the faint shifting of feet, the small murmurs, and the sharp intake of breath from a few students who had long doubted him. It was as if the world had condensed into this moment, and he was standing alone at its center. He arranged his materials carefully, making sure everything was just right. His hands trembled slightly, but he refused to let it show. He reminded himself that this was not about pleasing the teacher or proving the classmates wrong. This was about showing himself that all those hours of preparation had meaning, that all the quiet work had been worth it. He began speaking softly, his voice barely above a whisper at first, but steady. With each word, he felt a small wave of confidence building, a rhythm forming that matched the practice he had done so many times in solitude. At first, some students exchanged doubtful glances, ready to smirk or whisper. But as the boy continued, the tone shifted. There was precision in his voice, a clarity in his expression that spoke of effort and sincerity. He was not performing to impress. He was simply doing what he knew to be right, the way he had rehearsed countless times in the quiet of his room. His hands moved naturally, his gestures purposeful, and his focus unwavering. The classroom, once buzzing with anticipation of failure, began to quiet, replaced with attention and curiosity. The teacher watched carefully, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Initially, her expression had been one of doubt, expecting the boy to falter, to stumble, to fail. But now she felt a quiet surprise. The boy was not faltering. He was rising, not in arrogance, but in skill and quiet confidence. Every detail, every movement was deliberate. She could feel the change in the room, the subtle shift from doubt to intrigue. Students who had whispered or snickered were now leaning forward, their eyes fixed on him, their skepticism slowly giving way to surprise. Halfway through his presentation, the boy paused briefly to gather his thoughts. His heart was still racing, but he had learned to channel that energy into focus rather than fear. He glanced around the room, noticing the expressions of his classmates. Some were genuinely impressed, some were shocked into silence, and a few were even smiling, quietly cheering him on in their own way. He felt a wave of warmth at the realization that his effort was being seen, that the work he had done in secret was now visible, meaningful, and appreciated. As he continued, his nervousness transformed into a quiet determination. Mistakes he had feared made no appearance. Instead, every word, every gesture, every detail showed preparation, care, and authenticity. He spoke with clarity, with a voice that grew stronger and more confident with each passing moment. The boy was not just completing the task. He was showing a part of himself that had always been hidden, a part that had been waiting for the right moment to shine. The classroom, which had started with whispers and doubt, was now entirely focused on him. The teacher, who had expected failure, found herself leaning slightly forward, her eyes widening in recognition of his skill. The boy, unaware of the full impact he was having, focused solely on his performance. He was no longer just the quiet, underestimated student. He was someone commanding attention with authenticity and talent. By the end of the presentation, the room was silent, the kind of silence that comes not from boredom but from genuine awe. The boy had done what everyone expected he could not. He had turned doubt into astonishment, nervousness into poise, and secrecy into revelation. The teacher finally spoke, her voice a mix of surprise and respect, acknowledging the boy's unexpected skill and effort. Classmates began to clap, some tentative at first, others enthusiastic, and soon the entire room was filled with applause. The boy felt a rush of relief, but also a deep, quiet pride. This was the moment he had been preparing for, and he had delivered it. As he walked back to his seat, the boy noticed subtle nods and smiles from peers who had previously doubted him. He felt a sense of accomplishment, but more than that, he felt seen. For the first time in a long time, he realized that preparation, patience, and belief in oneself could overcome even the loudest voices of doubt. He sat down quietly, still catching his breath, his heart full of anticipation for what came next. This was only the beginning, he knew, but the first step had been taken, and it had been nothing short of remarkable. The next part of the day brought an even bigger challenge for the boy. The classroom was quieter than usual, filled with a sense of anticipation that weighed heavily in the air. The teacher had given more instructions for a project that required not just knowledge but courage and creativity. Each student would have to perform in front of the class, demonstrating their skill and understanding in a way that left no room for hiding mistakes. The boy felt the familiar flutter of nerves in his stomach, a mixture of fear and determination. He had already surprised everyone once, but now the stakes felt higher, and the pressure more intense. He looked around the room, noticing the students preparing their materials, some confidently, others nervously, just like him. There was a subtle shift in the air. Some classmates who had doubted him before now glanced his way with a hint of curiosity, as if wondering what he would do next. A few even exchanged quiet whispers, trying not to be obvious, but the boy sensed their attention. He didn't let it distract him. Instead, he focused inward, recalling all the late nights he had spent practicing, perfecting his skills in private, away from judgment and expectation. That preparation was now his shield against fear. As the first student began, the boy observed closely. Mistakes, hesitation, and stumbles appeared in others' performances, reinforcing his own nervousness. He wondered if the same might happen to him, if despite his efforts, he would falter under the gaze of the entire class. His hands tightened around his materials, his mind a whirlwind of doubt and hope. But then he reminded himself that this was his moment to rise above expectation, to show that the quiet, underestimated boy could do something remarkable. He took a deep breath and prepared mentally for what lay ahead. When his turn came, the teacher's eyes locked onto him briefly, a mixture of doubt and intrigue. He walked to the front, every step feeling heavier than the last. The whispers started again, faint at first but growing, echoing in his mind like a chorus of skepticism. He remembered past moments when he had failed or stumbled, when the world seemed certain he could not succeed. Those memories stung, but they also fueled him. He had practiced, he had prepared, and he would not let fear dictate the outcome this time. The boy arranged his materials carefully, taking a moment to center himself. His hands shook slightly, but he forced himself to stay calm, focusing on the rhythm and flow he had rehearsed countless times in solitude. He began to speak, his voice soft at first, cautious, testing the waters. Some students exchanged skeptical glances, expecting him to stumble, to falter, to fail. The teacher watched closely, her face a mask of professionalism hiding a flicker of surprise at his calm demeanor. He continued, and with each word, his confidence grew, subtle but steady. The boy's voice gained clarity, his gestures natural and purposeful, as he began to take control of the moment. The first few minutes were tense. He made small pauses, careful not to rush, but also wary of losing focus. He felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him, the anticipation of failure from peers and teacher alike. Yet, as he moved forward, he started to notice something remarkable. The whispers of doubt were fading, replaced by quiet attention. Eyes that had been filled with skepticism now watched him closely, some with curiosity, others with quiet admiration. The energy in the room was shifting, and he felt it. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it gave him strength. Halfway through, a slight tremor of nervousness ran through him. He feared a small mistake might undo all his effort, that the room's attention might turn from awe to ridicule. He paused for a moment, closing his eyes briefly, drawing on every ounce of preparation and practice he had done in private. He remembered the quiet hours, the patience, the determination that had brought him here. That memory brought a renewed calm. He opened his eyes and continued, more focused than ever, each word, each gesture deliberate and precise. The boy was no longer just performing. He was commanding attention without arrogance, showing a depth of skill and authenticity that surprised everyone. The teacher's expression softened, her earlier skepticism giving way to surprise. The boy's talent, once hidden and underestimated, was now on full display. His classmates began to sit a little straighter, their doubts replaced with genuine curiosity. The boy noticed subtle nods and quiet expressions of admiration. Some who had expected a stumble were now leaning forward, captivated by what they were witnessing. The boy didn't let this distract him. He focused on each movement, each word, ensuring he gave his best, proving quietly but powerfully that effort and preparation could overcome doubt. As he reached the latter part of his presentation, he began to weave in the subtleties of his skill, the details that had been honed through countless hours of practice. The room was silent, every student and teacher fully absorbed. He felt a surge of calm determination, a quiet joy at being able to share what had always been private. His voice, once soft and tentative, now carried clarity and strength. The gestures that had been practiced so many times now flowed naturally, without hesitation or thought. The boy had entered a rhythm where fear no longer dictated his actions. Only focus, authenticity, and confidence guided him. By the time he finished, the room was completely silent, the kind of silence that comes from genuine surprise and admiration. The boy had not stumbled. He had not faltered. Instead, he had delivered a performance that was unexpectedly strong, subtle, but powerful. His classmates looked at him with newfound respect, some still processing what they had just seen. The teacher, who had predicted embarrassment, could no longer hide her astonishment. She nodded slightly, a quiet acknowledgement of his skill and effort. Walking back to his seat, the boy felt a wave of relief mixed with pride. He had faced the initial struggle, the weight of doubt, and had risen above it. The whispers that had once filled the room with doubt were replaced with quiet conversations of admiration. Some students who had doubted him were now quietly inspired. He realized that the real challenge was not just completing the task but overcoming the mental hurdles that came with fear and expectation. As he sat down, he reflected on what had just happened. He had begun to prove not just to the class, but to himself, that the quiet preparation, the patience, and the belief in his own ability could triumph over doubt. The initial struggle had been real, the tension palpable, but he had faced it head-on and found success. He knew that more challenges lay ahead, more moments where fear and doubt would try to push him down. But the boy felt something he had not felt before. The quiet confidence that came from knowing he could rise above expectation and show his true potential. The boy stood at the front of the classroom, feeling a mixture of nerves and determination as he prepared to take the next step in the presentation. He had already surprised everyone once, but he knew that the real test was just beginning. The room was quiet, the usual chatter replaced by focused attention. Eyes followed him closely, some filled with curiosity, others with lingering doubt. But the boy refused to let their expectations dictate his performance. He took a deep breath and centered himself, recalling all the hours he had spent preparing in private, all the moments when he had practiced until every movement felt natural. As he began to speak, he noticed the subtle changes in the room. The whispers had stopped, replaced by attentive silence. The classmates who had doubted him were leaning forward slightly, their eyes fixed on him, waiting to see what he would do next. The teacher, who had initially expected embarrassment, now watched with a mixture of intrigue and surprise. The boy felt a small spark of confidence. This was his chance to show his hidden strength, the part of himself that had been underestimated for so long. He started to demonstrate his skill, his movements smooth and deliberate, his voice steady and clear. Every gesture, every word, reflected the effort and dedication he had invested over the years. It was not a show for attention or praise. It was a genuine expression of what he had been quietly perfecting. The classroom atmosphere shifted further as the boy's skill became more apparent. Faces that had been skeptical now displayed awe, and a few students exchanged impressed glances, silently acknowledging the talent that had remained hidden until this moment. Midway through his performance, the boy encountered a moment of doubt. A slight slip in memory caused a brief hesitation, and he could feel the tension in the room. For a split second, he imagined the whispers returning, the laughter, the judgment. But then he remembered all the times he had practiced in solitude, the countless hours of preparation that had brought him to this moment. Drawing on that inner reservoir of confidence, he continued seamlessly, turning the potential stumble into an opportunity to showcase his adaptability and focus. The classmates' attention intensified. They were captivated by how he had handled the challenge with grace and poise. The teacher leaned forward slightly, her expression softening as she observed the boy. She could see that he was not just competent but exceptional, revealing a depth of skill that had been overlooked. The boy's quiet determination and focused energy created a ripple effect in the classroom. Other students, inspired by his calm and competence, began to watch more closely, absorbing the lesson in perseverance and self-belief that was unfolding before them. The boy had become more than a student performing a task. He had become an example of what careful preparation, patience, and courage could achieve. As he continued, the boy began to introduce subtle variations in his presentation, details that showcased not only his technical skill but also his creativity. These small enhancements drew attention and admiration from the classmates. Each gesture, each carefully chosen word, highlighted his unique approach, and the room seemed to lean in collectively, eager to see what he would do next. Even the students who had been most critical or skeptical could not hide their amazement. The boy had transformed the expectation of failure into a demonstration of quiet brilliance. With every passing moment, the boy's confidence grew. He no longer felt the crushing weight of doubt or the fear of judgment. Instead, he was fully present, immersed in the act of sharing his skill. The teacher's initial doubt had melted into recognition, and the classmates' curiosity had evolved into admiration. The boy had begun to control the narrative, taking the audience from a place of skepticism to a state of engagement and respect. He realized that the real challenge had never been the task itself but the act of believing in his own ability despite the expectations of others. As he approached the final portion of his presentation, the boy drew on all his preparation and focus. Every element was precise, deliberate, and expressive. He had reached a point where the performance felt natural, almost effortless, and yet it carried the weight of every hour he had dedicated to honing his skill. The classroom was silent in awe, captivated by the unexpected depth and clarity of his demonstration. The boy had taken what was once a source of fear and transformed it into a display of competence and grace. When he finished, the boy took a moment to breathe, to let the weight of the moment settle. The room remained quiet for a brief instant, the kind of silence that speaks of astonishment and respect. Then, slowly, the first claps began, tentative at first, then growing louder as more classmates joined in. The teacher finally spoke, her voice filled with genuine surprise and acknowledgement. She admitted, quietly but sincerely, that she had underestimated him. The boy had revealed a talent and resilience that no one had fully anticipated. As he walked back to his seat, the boy felt a mix of relief, pride, and quiet satisfaction. He had not only completed the task but had also changed the perception of those around him. Classmates who had doubted him now regarded him with respect, and the teacher's earlier skepticism had transformed into admiration. The boy realized that this moment was not just about proving himself to others but about recognizing his own potential. He had faced fear, managed doubt, and revealed a part of himself that had long remained hidden. Sitting down, the boy reflected on what had just occurred. The challenge had been difficult, the pressure immense, but he had navigated it successfully. He had learned that true strength comes not from avoiding fear, but from confronting it with preparation, focus, and self-belief. The experience had shifted something inside him, a growing awareness that he could rise above expectation and reveal his talents when it mattered most. The boy felt a quiet but profound sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had begun to rewrite the story that others had once assumed would end in failure. This was a turning point, a moment that would stay with him, reminding him that his abilities were real, his efforts meaningful, and his potential far greater than anyone, including himself, had imagined. The boy stepped forward, feeling a wave of energy and anticipation unlike anything he had experienced before. The classroom was silent, every eye watching him closely, some with surprise, some with admiration, and a few still uncertain. He had reached the climax of his performance, the point where everything he had practiced, everything he had prepared for would be fully revealed. The nervousness that had accompanied him from the start now mixed with excitement and focus. He knew that this was the moment to leave an impression that would last, not just a fleeting recognition, but something unforgettable. He began the final segment of his task, his movements precise and confident, his voice steady and clear. Every word, every gesture, reflected his dedication and hours of preparation. He had learned to control his fear, to channel it into focus and strength. The classmates who had doubted him were now leaning forward, their skepticism replaced by genuine attention. The teacher, who had once openly questioned his ability, now watched with a mixture of awe and pride. The boy felt the energy of the room, the attention and anticipation, and used it to fuel his performance, not letting it intimidate him. As he continued, the boy added subtle elements that he had never shown anyone before, small flourishes and details that highlighted not only his skill but his creativity and understanding. The classmates were captivated, their eyes fixed, their whispers gone. The teacher's expression softened, a faint smile appearing as she realized that she had underestimated him. The boy's quiet determination and careful preparation had transformed the classroom environment, turning doubt into admiration and surprise. Halfway through, the boy encountered a moment of potential difficulty. A memory lapse, a brief hesitation, threatened to disrupt his flow. For a split second, he imagined the laughter and whispers returning, the judgment he had faced so many times before. But he drew on the strength he had cultivated through years of practice, remembering the countless hours he had spent perfecting his skill. He paused, took a deep breath, and continued seamlessly. The classmates noticed the smooth recovery, impressed by his composure and resilience. The boy had turned a possible mistake into an opportunity to demonstrate mastery and confidence. With every passing second, his presence grew stronger. He was no longer just a student performing a task. He had become the center of attention, commanding the room without arrogance or showiness. The teacher, who had expected failure, now regarded him with clear recognition and respect. Even the classmates who had doubted him could not look away, their expressions a mixture of awe and surprise. The boy's calm energy and focused performance had transformed the entire classroom atmosphere. As he approached the final moments, the boy poured all his energy into the performance. Every detail, every word, every gesture was deliberate and full of meaning. He had reached a state of flow, where the hours of preparation and practice merged seamlessly with the present moment. The classroom was silent, completely absorbed, watching in amazement as the boy completed the task with skill, grace, and authenticity. The tension that had accompanied the performance from the start was replaced by admiration and respect. When he finally finished, the room remained silent for a brief moment, as if the impact of what they had just witnessed needed to settle. Then, slowly, the applause began, growing steadily until the entire class joined in. Some students were still processing what they had seen, their skepticism replaced by amazement. The teacher, who had once doubted him, finally spoke, her voice filled with genuine surprise and respect. She acknowledged the boy's talent and effort, admitting that she had been wrong in her initial judgment. The boy felt a rush of relief and pride. He had not only completed the task but had exceeded expectations, leaving a lasting impression on everyone in the room. He had transformed doubt into admiration and had proven to himself and others that preparation, perseverance, and self-belief could overcome even the strongest skepticism. The classmates' expressions reflected their newfound respect, and a few even offered quiet nods of encouragement and acknowledgement. Walking back to his seat, the boy felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The experience had been intense, but it had also been empowering. He realized that the true challenge had not been the performance itself but overcoming the fear and doubt that had accompanied it. He had faced the expectations of others, the whispers of skepticism, and the weight of judgment, and he had risen above them with calm, focus, and skill. The boy knew that this moment would stay with him, a reminder of what could be achieved when preparation met opportunity. Sitting down, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From the quiet hours of practice to the tense moments of initial struggle, he had navigated fear and doubt, emerging stronger and more confident. He had shown that talent and determination, even when hidden, could shine through when given the chance. The applause and admiration of his classmates and the recognition from the teacher were rewards, but the deeper satisfaction came from within, from knowing that he had faced the challenge and succeeded on his own terms. As the class continued with other students' presentations, the boy's mind lingered on what had just happened. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, a growing belief in his own abilities, and a realization that the limitations others placed on him were never truly his own. The experience had taught him the power of patience, focus, and courage, and he knew that future challenges would be easier to face with this newfound confidence. The boy had not only stunned his classmates, but had also discovered a deeper understanding of himself, a recognition that he could rise above doubt and show the world his true potential. The boy returned to his seat, feeling a mix of relief, pride, and quiet excitement. The classroom was alive with whispers and subdued chatter, classmates still talking about what they had just witnessed. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others smiled, impressed by the boy's skill and composure. The teacher, who had once doubted him so openly, now had a different look in her eyes, a mixture of respect and admiration. She had expected embarrassment, yet here stood a student who had completely exceeded her expectations. The boy felt a warm sense of validation, not just from the teacher's recognition, but from knowing he had challenged himself and succeeded. The rest of the class continued with their presentations, but the boy's performance lingered in the minds of everyone present. Each new presentation was met with attention, but it was impossible not to compare it to what he had just done. Classmates whispered quietly among themselves, sharing their astonishment and trying to understand how he had managed to deliver such a poised, skillful, and confident performance. The boy remained calm, letting the attention settle around him. He did not boast or call for praise. He simply absorbed the moment, reflecting on everything he had learned in the process. As the day went on, the impact of his performance became even more apparent. Teachers passing through the hallway gave him nods of acknowledgement. Classmates greeted him with newfound respect, and even students who had previously ignored or doubted him approached with kind words and curiosity. The boy realized that his actions had not only demonstrated skill but had also inspired others, showing that quiet preparation and dedication could quietly change the perception of those around him. During lunch, the boy sat with a few classmates who had watched his performance closely. They asked questions about how he had prepared and how he had remained so calm under pressure. He shared a little about the long hours he had spent practicing in private, focusing on details that no one else would notice. His words were simple but sincere, and his classmates listened intently, absorbing the lesson that effort, persistence, and belief in oneself often yield results that surprise everyone. The boy realized that his story was not just about impressing others, but about inspiring them to believe in their own potential. After school, the boy walked home slowly, reflecting on the events of the day. He thought about the teacher's doubt at the beginning, the whispers in the classroom, and the initial fear that had accompanied him. Each moment had been a challenge, but every challenge had also been an opportunity to grow. He understood now that fear and doubt were natural, but they did not define him. It was his response to them, his decision to persevere and trust in his own abilities, that had made the difference. This realization filled him with a quiet sense of empowerment that he had never experienced before. That evening, the boy practiced a little more, not out of obligation, but because he enjoyed refining his skill. He reflected on the day, thinking about the confidence he had gained and the lessons he had learned. Preparation, patience, and belief in oneself were not just abstract ideas. They were tangible qualities that had allowed him to shine when it mattered most. He felt proud, not in a boastful way, but in the knowledge that he had faced his fears and succeeded on his own terms. The applause and admiration he had received were meaningful, but the deeper reward was the understanding that he had proven to himself what he was capable of. In the days that followed, the boy noticed subtle but significant changes. Teachers approached him with encouragement, classmates included him in discussions and activities with more respect, and even those who had doubted him began to recognize his abilities. The boy felt a growing sense of belonging, not because he had sought it, but because his actions had naturally earned it. He realized that recognition was not something to be demanded. It was something that came as a result of effort, skill, and integrity. The boy also noticed how his own self-perception had changed. He was more confident, more willing to take risks, and more comfortable trusting his own judgment. Weeks later, the boy faced other challenges, both academic and personal, but he approached them with a new mindset. The lessons he had learned from that pivotal day carried him through moments of doubt and uncertainty. He knew that failure was not the end, and that fear was not something to avoid. Instead, he saw them as opportunities to test his abilities and grow stronger. The boy's quiet confidence and perseverance became apparent to everyone around him, earning respect not through arrogance, but through consistent effort and demonstrated skill. He had learned that true strength was not about being the loudest or the most visible. It was about trusting oneself, even when others doubted. Looking back, the boy realized that the day when the teacher had said he would humiliate himself had been a turning point. The words, once filled with doubt, had become a challenge that he had accepted and overcome. What had begun as fear had transformed into determination, and the result had been a demonstration of skill, resilience, and authenticity. The classroom that had once expected failure now stood as a testament to the power of preparation, courage, and self-belief. The boy had not only left his classmates and teachers stunned, but had also discovered a deeper understanding of himself, one that would guide him through future challenges. The boy continued to grow, quietly, steadily, building on the confidence and recognition he had earned. His experiences became a source of inspiration for others, a reminder that patience, practice, and belief in oneself could lead to surprising and remarkable outcomes. The memory of that day stayed with him, a symbol of triumph over doubt, a demonstration that even those who seem quiet, overlooked, or underestimated can achieve greatness when they trust in their own abilities. The boy had learned a valuable lesson, that success is not always immediate or obvious, but with perseverance, focus, and courage, it can emerge in the most unexpected and unforgettable ways.